Daughter-in-law didn't raise her voice, she didn't make a scene. She simply looked at me across the kitchen counter, smiled the way people smile when they've already decided something and said, "You know, Mama, you're living rent-free here." Then she turned back to her cutting board like she hadn't just said anything at all. I stood there for a moment holding a dish towel. My son was sitting at the table behind me. He didn't say a word. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I set the dish towel down slowly, excused myself, and walked to my room. And later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I opened the small cedar box I keep on the top shelf of my closet. Inside was a folded piece of paper my husband Raymond had placed there 14 years ago. On the outside, in his handwriting, it said, "For Irene. Open when something doesn't feel right." I opened it, and everything began to change. If you've ever been in a room full of people and still felt completely alone, you'll understand why I'm telling this story. Before I go any further, take a moment to like this video and subscribe if stories like this speak to something in your life. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from tonight and what time is it where you are? It matters more than you know, just hearing that someone else is out there listening. The strange thing about being made to feel small is that it almost never happens all at once. It happens the way water finds its way through a wall, slowly, patiently, one tiny crack at a time, until one day you realize the whole structure has shifted and you can't quite remember when it started. My name is Irene Caldwell. I'm 69 years old and I spent 38 years married to a man who believed that love and preparation were not two separate things. Raymond was a retired civil engineer. He used to say that the most dangerous bridges were the ones that looked fine from the outside. You can't just trust what you see, he'd tell me. You have to understand what's holding it up. Raymond and I raised our son Douglas in a yellow house on a quiet street in Raleigh, North Carolina. Nothing fancy. A vegetable garden in the back that Raymond tended every spring. A porch where we drank coffee every Sunday morning regardless of the weather. It was the kind of house that knew you. The kind where the creaky floorboard near the hallway becomes a sound you stop noticing until the day it's gone. Douglas grew up loved. I want to say that clearly because it matters to the rest of this story. He was a sensitive boy, curious about everything, the kind of child who brought home stray cats and once spent an entire summer trying to build a birdhouse from scratch. Raymond coached his Little League team. I volunteered at his school every year until he graduated. We weren't wealthy people, but Douglas never lacked for anything that truly mattered. He married Serena when he was 34. She was efficient, organized, and very deliberate in the way she spoke. She worked in real estate, which meant she was comfortable talking about money in ways that made other people quiet down. Douglas had found steady work in logistics management, and together they bought a house in Charlotte and seemed to build a reasonable life. Raymond and I visited a few times a year, usually around the holidays. Their daughter Lily was born when Douglas was 36, and becoming a grandmother was one of the softest surprises I've ever experienced. Life moved the way life does. Steadily, quietly, without announcing itself. Until Raymond died. It was a February morning. He had been complaining about fatigue for weeks, the kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. I thought it was the winter. He thought it was getting older. The doctor found something else entirely. The diagnosis came on a Tuesday. He was gone 6 weeks later. Grief is not something I can describe adequately. It changes the temperature of every room. It sits in chairs, it follows you into grocery stores and ambushes you in the cereal aisle at 11 in the morning. For the first few months after Raymond passed, I lived in that yellow house alone, and the alone of it was unlike anything I had prepared for. Douglas called regularly. He sounded worried in the way adult children sound worried when they don't know what else to do. "Mom," he said one evening, "you shouldn't have to manage that house by yourself." I told him I was fine. He said he understood, but he kept calling and Serena started joining the calls, and by springtime, they had a different kind of suggestion. "We'd love for you to come stay with us," Douglas said carefully one Sunday afternoon. "The house has plenty of room. Lily would love having you there." I looked around at Raymond's garden, just beginning to come up through the cold ground. I said I would think about it. "It's a lot of house to maintain alone, Mom," Douglas added, "especially at your..." He stopped. "Especially was everything you've been going through." He didn't say at your age. but I heard it anyway. Grief, I have learned, makes people remarkably easy to persuade. By that summer, I had listed the Raleigh house. Douglas helped coordinate the sale. He said he would help manage the proceeds, invest them properly, make sure I was taken care of. I trusted him completely. Why would I have done anything else? He was my son. He was Raymond's son. I signed the paperwork he placed in front of me without reading much of it because reading paperwork felt like the kind of thing Raymond used to handle, and Raymond was gone, and I didn't know how to be a person who read her own paperwork yet. By fall, I was living in Charlotte, in the spare bedroom of Douglas and Serena's house. The first weeks were genuinely warm. Lily, who was 8, greeted me every morning before school with a hug that nearly knocked me sideways. Douglas made sure I had a comfortable chair in the living room. Serena showed me where everything was kept and told me to help myself to whatever I needed. For a little while, it felt like something could grow here. But families change slowly. That's what no one tells you. Not dramatically. Not with a scene you can point to and say, there, that's when it started. Just slowly, like the season turning, until you look up one day and the warmth is gone and you can't remember the last time you felt it. The first sign was small. I had been making breakfast one morning, scrambled eggs, toast, nothing elaborate, when Serena came downstairs and looked at the pan on the stove with an expression I couldn't quite name. "Oh," she said pleasantly, "you don't have to do that. I usually handle breakfast." I apologized and offered to clean up. She said it was fine, but from that morning forward there was a new arrangement in the kitchen that no one announced out loud. It simply appeared, the way rules appear when someone decides they exist. Within a few weeks, I had learned not to use the kitchen before Serena had come downstairs, not to run the dishwasher until after 9 at night, not to buy groceries without telling her first because she kept a list, not to adjust the thermostat because she kept track of utility bills. Each of these things individually sounded reasonable. Together they formed something else, a perimeter, and I was on the outside of it. Douglas didn't notice, or if he did, he didn't say anything. He came home from work tired most evenings and spent dinner scrolling through something on his phone while Serena talked about her day. When he asked how I was doing, the question was kind but brief, a formality, the kind of thing you say because you're supposed to, not because you're waiting for the answer. I tried to be useful. I picked Lily up from school twice a week. I folded laundry. I organized the pantry one afternoon when no one was home, thinking it might help. Serena thanked me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, and spent the next evening reorganizing everything back the way it had been. The only person in that house who treated me the same way every single day without calculation or adjustment was Lily. She would crawl into my room some evenings and sit on the end of the bed telling me things about her school friends with the kind of total confidence that children have before the world teaches them to be careful about who they talk to. "You're my favorite person to tell things to," she said once. I held on to that sentence for a long time. Then one evening I heard them. I had gone to bed early but realized I'd left my reading glasses on the kitchen counter. I was walking down the hallway when I heard Serena's voice from the living room. Quiet, but clear. "The grocery bill has gone up almost $40 a week," she was saying. Douglas made a low sound. "And she runs the laundry almost every other day." "She's my mother," Douglas said. "I know that." Serena's voice was patient, practiced. "I'm not saying she shouldn't be here. I'm saying we should be honest about what it costs." I stood in the dark hallway for longer than I should have. Then I went back to my room without my glasses. The next morning I told myself I had misunderstood. The morning after that I told myself the same thing, but something had shifted inside me in that hallway, the way a piece of furniture shifts when someone moves it. Just enough that you keep walking into it in the dark. Weeks passed. The comments became part of the atmosphere of the house. Nothing cruel enough to confront directly, just comments. About the electric bill. About how much food Lily was eating lately, said with a sideways glance. Douglas once joked at dinner that his grocery budget had never recovered from having 2 women who liked good coffee in the house. Everyone laughed. I laughed too. What else do you do? But underneath the laughter a message was forming, a quiet, persistent message. I was costing them something. Then the mail started going missing. At first I assumed it was ordinary postal delays. But after the 3rd week, I noticed that Douglas always seemed to have checked the mailbox before I got there. When I asked whether anything had arrived for me, he gave the same casual answer each time. Just the usual stuff, Mom. Nothing important. One afternoon he wasn't home yet and I reached the mailbox first. There were 2 envelopes addressed to me. One was from my insurance company. The other was from Piedmont Savings and Trust, the bank Raymond and I had used for most of our marriage. I took them inside and opened both. The insurance letter was routine. The bank statement was not. I don't have a background in finance. I never did. That had been Raymond's territory, carefully and willingly. But I understood enough to see what was unusual. There was a transaction notation I didn't recognize. Pending authorization, beneficiary trust, disbursement. Below it was a number that made me sit down in the kitchen chair and stay there for several minutes. That evening at dinner I watched Douglas differently than I usually did. The way he reached for the bread. The way he listened to Serena's story about a listing that had fallen through. The easy, relaxed confidence of a man who believes things are going according to plan. After dinner, I approached him in the living room. "Douglas," I said, sitting across from him, "have you been managing the accounts from the Raleigh house sale?" He looked up from his phone. "Of course. Why?" "I was just thinking I should probably look over some statements myself." Something shifted in his face. Not dramatically, just slightly. The way a candle flame shifts when someone walks past it. "You don't need to worry about any of that," he said. "I've got it covered." "I'd still like to take a look," I said. He smiled. "Mom, there's nothing to look at. It's all been organized." That phrase, "it's all been organized." I smiled back and said I understood, but I didn't sleep well that night. The next morning, while Douglas was at work and Serena was showing a property across town, I sat at my small desk with the bank statement in front of me and thought about what Raymond had written in that cedar box note. The note was short. His handwriting was steady and familiar. It said, "Irene, if anything ever feels unclear, call Martin Okafor. He knows everything." I made sure of it. Trust him the way you trust me. Martin Okafor was Raymond's attorney. I had met him once or twice over the years at dinners and one holiday party. Raymond had always described him as the most careful man he knew. I had never called him professionally. I had never needed to. Until now. I found his number in the small leather address book Raymond kept. I dialed before I could talk myself out of it. Martin's assistant put me on hold for less than 2 minutes. When he picked up, his voice was warm and unhurried. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said, "I've been hoping you'd call." Something about those 6 words made my throat tighten. We arranged to meet the following afternoon. I told no one in the house where I was going. Martin Okafor's office was on the 3rd floor of a building downtown, neatly organized and quietly professional. A framed photograph of Raymond stood on the bookshelf behind his desk, taken at what looked like a professional conference. I hadn't seen that photograph in years. Martin noticed me looking at it. "He brought that when we signed the paperwork," he said with a small smile, "said it would keep me honest." I laughed in spite of everything. We sat down. Martin folded his hands calmly on the desk. "Tell me what's been worrying you," he said. I slid the bank statement across to him and explained what I had noticed. He studied it carefully. The room was quiet for almost a full minute. Then he looked up. "Mrs. Caldwell, I need to tell you something that Raymond asked me to explain to you when the time came." He opened a folder. Several years before he passed, Raymond established what's called a revocable living trust. He named it the Caldwell Family Trust. I stared at him. He never told me the details. "He didn't want to alarm you," Martin said carefully. "He simply wanted to make sure you were protected if he was no longer there to protect you himself." I thought about the vegetable garden, about Sunday mornings on the porch, about Raymond saying you can't just trust what you see. Martin turned the folder toward me. "You are the primary beneficiary and the primary trustee of this trust. That means all major decisions involving these assets require your authorization, not Douglas's, yours." The word "yours" landed somewhere deep. "But Douglas has been managing the accounts," I said. "Douglas was granted limited co-trustee authority," Martin said. "It allows him to handle routine transactions. But there are limits." "And the pending disbursement on this statement?" Martin looked at the paper again. "That exceeds those limits significantly." He set it down. which means it requires your signature to proceed, and from what I can see, you were never consulted. The kitchen, the laundry rules, the missing mail, the phrase "it's all been organized," everything rearranged itself inside my mind. Martin continued quietly. Raymond also included a protective clause in the trust document. If you believe the trust is being accessed in ways you didn't authorize, you can assume full administrative control immediately. No waiting period, no other signature required. Immediately, I repeated. Yes, I drove home that afternoon in a kind of stillness I hadn't felt since Raymond died. Not peace exactly. Something sturdier than peace. Clarity. The kind that comes when you finally understand the shape of something you've been living inside of without being able to see it clearly. The following days I did what Martin had advised. I paid attention without showing it. Douglas, I noticed, spent his evenings in the small home office with the door mostly closed. Serena occasionally went in and came back out speaking in the low, careful voice people use when they don't want to be overheard. One evening I passed the hallway and caught a fragment of their conversation. "Once it clears," Serena was saying, "we can finally get ahead of the second mortgage." Douglas said something I couldn't hear. Serena said, "She'll sign it. She always signs whatever you give her." I went upstairs and sat on the edge of my bed for a long time after that. 3 days later, an envelope appeared on the kitchen table addressed to me. Return address, Piedmont Savings and Trust. Thicker than a regular statement. I picked it up before Douglas got home. Inside were several pages. The heading on the first page read, "Revocable Living Trust Authorization Request for Asset Disbursement and Restructure." Below that was a dollar figure. Below that was a signature line printed with my name. I folded the documents and placed them back in the envelope. Then I set the envelope on the table and waited. Douglas came home around 6. He moved through the kitchen cheerfully, poured himself a glass of water, and then noticed the envelope. "Oh, good," he said, almost to himself. He picked it up and glanced at it the way someone glances at something they've already read. Then he placed it in front of me. "The bank sent some routine paperwork," he said. "Just needs your signature so we can get the accounts properly organized." Serena was leaning against the counter. Lily was in the next room watching something on her tablet. The ordinary sounds of an ordinary evening. I looked down at the envelope. Then I looked up at my son. "Douglas," I said, "I'd like to talk about this before I sign anything." He blinked. "There's really nothing to talk about this before I sign anything." He blinked. "There's really nothing to talk about. It's just administrative." "It doesn't look administrative to me," I said. Serena stepped forward. "Mama, the bank just needs to update the account structure. It'll make everything simpler." I nodded slowly. "Simpler for who?" Silence. Douglas pulled out the chair across from me and sat down. His voice was still calm, but something behind it had tightened. "Mom, I've been handling everything for over a year. You don't need to worry about the details." "I'd like to understand the details," I said. "There's nothing complicated here." "Then explain it to me," I said. "What happens to the trust if I sign this?" Douglas hesitated. That hesitation told me more than any explanation would have. "The assets get consolidated," he said finally, "into an account that's easier to manage long term. Managed by you, for the family." I looked at the pages in front of me. Raymond's name was printed in the trust section header. Raymond, who spent 38 years making sure I would never have to ask anyone's permission to live my own life. "Douglas," I said, "I spoke with Martin Okafor." The color changed in his face. Serena made a small sound and looked away. "You spoke to the attorney?" Douglas asked quietly. "Yes, when, a few days ago." Silence settled into the kitchen like something with weight. Douglas put his hand on the edge of the table. "Mom, there was no need to involve a lawyer. He explained the trust to me," I said. "He explained what this disbursement would actually do." "It doesn't change anything. It changes who manages the assets," I said, "and it doesn't require you to do it. It never did." Serena's voice came in quiet and careful. "We were trying to help. Everything has gotten so expensive. The mortgage, Lily's school, I understand that," I said. "Then you understand why we needed to restructure." "I understand why you wanted to," I said. "I'm asking why you didn't ask me." Douglas looked at the table. A long moment passed. Then he said something I hadn't expected, because I thought you might say no. The honesty of it surprised me. I sat with it for a moment before responding. You were probably right, I said. Douglas looked up. Then, but Douglas, I said, you not asking me is not the same as me not having the right to decide. Serena closed her eyes briefly. Your father built that trust, I said, because he believed that loving someone means protecting their right to make their own choices, even choices you disagree with. Douglas was quiet for a long moment. Then he said very softly, How much did Okafor tell you? Enough, I said. The disbursements I've taken, I know about those too. He rubbed his face with both hands. Serena had stopped leaning against the counter. She was standing very still now. I wasn't trying to steal from you, Mom. I know that, I said. I was trying to keep everything from falling apart. I believe you. Then why won't you sign it? I looked at him steadily. Because your father didn't build that trust to be a solution to someone else's financial pressure. He built it to make sure I always had the freedom to choose. I paused, and right now, I'm choosing. Douglas stared at the unsigned pages. Lily called something from the other room, something cheerful and entirely unaware of what was happening in the kitchen. The ordinary life of the house continued around us like water around a stone. Serena spoke first. So what happens now? The trust stays exactly as Raymond designed it, I said. She nodded once. Tightly. Douglas was quiet for another moment. Then he looked up at me. Are you angry with me? I thought about that honestly. I'm disappointed, I said, but I'm also your mother, and I understand what pressure does to people. I paused. I just needed you to understand that I see it. The next few days were careful and quiet. Douglas and I moved around each other with the particular politeness of two people who have said things that can't be unsaid and are not yet sure what to do with that. Serena was civil in the way people are civil when civility is all they have left. But 3 days after that conversation, Douglas knocked on my bedroom door in the evening. He sat in the chair across from me, the same way he used to sit in the kitchen as a boy when he'd done something wrong and didn't quite know how to start. I'm sorry, he said, not for wanting to fix the financial situation, but for the way I went about it. I waited. I thought you wouldn't understand, he said, the mortgage rate, the balloon payment coming up, Lily's school tuition. I thought if I just handled it quietly it would be easier. Easier for who? I asked gently. He was quiet for a moment. For me, he admitted, because I didn't want you to see how much we were struggling. I hadn't expected that either. The pride of it, the shame underneath the plan. Raymond would have understood that, I said. Douglas looked surprised. He would. He also didn't like asking for help, I said, but he learned to. I looked at my son. What do you actually need, Douglas? Not what you were trying to take. What do you actually need? He told me. It took a while, and some of it was hard to hear, but he told me. The second mortgage, the school costs, the way the numbers had quietly accumulated into something that kept him awake at night. And when he finished, I said, let's figure out what I can actually offer. Honestly. With Martin at the table, so everything is clear to everyone. Douglas blinked. You do that. I'm your mother, I said, but I'm also a person. Those two things have to be able to exist at the same time. Something shifted in his face then. Not relief, exactly. Something older than relief. Something closer to recognition. What happened after that conversation took several weeks to arrange properly. Martin helped structure a formal agreement, a transparent loan arrangement clearly documented, with terms that protected both sides. Not the kind of quiet maneuvering that had been attempted before. Something honest, something Raymond would have called a real plan, and I began looking for a place of my own. Not because Douglas and Serena pushed me out. They didn't. In fact, once everything was in the open, the atmosphere in the house became something I hadn't felt there before. Genuine. Lily still came to my room in the evenings to talk. Douglas stopped closing the home office door. Serena and I had our first real conversation sitting at the kitchen table one afternoon, just the two of us, about what it's like to hold a household together when the numbers won't cooperate. But I had learned something important in that house. I had learned that loving people and having independence from them are not opposing things. That dignity is not negotiable. Not in exchange for a spare bedroom, not in exchange for family peace, not for any reason at all. Raymond knew that. He spent years making sure I would know it too, even after he was gone. I found a small apartment 20 minutes away, in a building with good light and a balcony where I intend to grow tomatoes this summer. The day I signed my own lease, with my own pen, for my own home, I sat in the car afterward and cried. Not from sadness, from something that felt more like recognition. The feeling of being a full person again. The cedar box is on my new bookshelf now. I've read Raymond's notes so many times, the paper is softened along the fold lines. I keep it there not as a reminder of what I almost lost, but as a reminder of what he always believed I was capable of. He was right. He usually was. Families are complicated. Love doesn't prevent confusion, and it doesn't always prevent people from making choices that hurt the ones they love. What it can do, if there's enough honesty in the room, is bring people back to each other after those choices have been made. Douglas and I speak every week now. Lily comes to my apartment on Sunday afternoons and we bake things and she tells me everything. Serena and I are not close, but we are respectful. And respect, I've learned, is sometimes the truest form of love that's available. If this story touched something in you, I would love to hear about it. Have you ever been in a moment where speaking up changed everything, or stayed silent longer than you should have? Leave a comment and tell me. And tell me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are right now. If stories like this speak to you, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. There are many more stories about the quiet things that happen inside families, about love and money and pride and forgiveness, and you shouldn't have to navigate any of it alone. Thank you for being here. It means more than I can say. I've thought a lot about what it means to let something go too far before you say anything. I did that. For months I washed dishes quietly, adjusted my schedule around someone else's rules, and told myself I was being gracious. I thought that was the mature thing to do. Now I'm not so sure gracious and silent are the same thing, and I'm not sure I knew the difference back then. What I've come to understand is that what happened in that house didn't start with Serena's comment about the rent. It started long before that, the first time I handed someone else a piece of paper without reading it. The first time I heard my name mentioned in a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear and chose to go back to my room instead of saying something. Every quiet moment where I could have spoken and didn't, those weren't acts of peace, they were invitations. And people, even people who love you, will walk through an open door. Douglas isn't a bad man. I want to be clear about that because I think it matters. He was a man under real pressure who made a series of choices that got easier each time I didn't push back. That's how it works. Not with one dramatic decision, but with 100 small ones, each one made simpler because the last one went unchallenged. When I finally sat across from him at that table and didn't sign, I wasn't punishing him. I was stopping a pattern that I had helped create by staying quiet for so long. Raymond understood something about that. He spent decades watching people build things, and he knew that the foundation is what determines everything else. That's why he built the trust the way he did. Not because he doubted Douglas, because he understood that circumstances change people, that pressure reveals things, and that the kindest thing you can do for someone you love is refuse to let them become a version of themselves they'd be ashamed of later. Stopping Douglas from completing that transfer wasn't just protecting myself. It was protecting him from something he couldn't see he was becoming. The hardest part of all of it wasn't the confrontation. It was the moment after, when I had to ask myself why I had waited so long. And the honest answer is that I confused needing people with being at their mercy. I needed Douglas. I needed a place to land after Raymond died. And that need made me careful, made me small, made me arrange myself around everyone else's comfort so they wouldn't decide I was too much trouble. That's not love. That's fear wearing love's clothing. What pulled me out of it was Raymond's handwriting on that folded piece of paper. Not the instructions exactly, but the fact that he had written them, that he had sat down, years before he died, and thought carefully about who I was and what I might need, and made sure I would have it. That kind of love doesn't ask you to shrink. It asks you to remember your own size. I think about Lily too. She's 9 years old and she watched all of this from the edges. The way children watch things they don't have words for yet. I don't know what she understood, but I know what I want her to understand someday, that a woman who knows what she's worth doesn't negotiate it away for the sake of keeping the peace. That dignity isn't stubbornness. It's just the truth about who you are, held steady even when everything around you is asking you to let it go. My tomatoes are coming in well this summer. The balcony gets good light in the afternoon, and I sit out there sometimes with my coffee and think about Raymond, about Douglas, about the yellow house in Raleigh and everything it held. I don't regret moving in with my son. I don't even regret how long it took me to speak up. I just know now that silence has a cost, and I'd rather spend my words than pay that price again.